A very good evening and a very warm welcome to our Buddhist Mahavyara's Facebook page. We are going live this evening here from our Buddhist Mahavyara's Facebook Live. And as usual, on our Buddhist Mahavyara Dhammadana series, we bring you another interesting topic this evening on Buddhism. And today, we're not focusing so much on what is this? I will call it as in the theory, or rather, we will explore something new that has never been discussed here on the Dhammadana series. And we have with us two very distinguished and erudite educators or speakers from Europe. One is from the UK, and the other one is from Holland. We have with us Professor B. Scherer from Holland and Dr. Sunil Kariyakarawanaand from the UK. Who's going to talk to us about Buddhist spiritual care in the West? What form should it take? Now, as you know, we have never discussed anything like this prior to the show in the last 1.5 years, I think, or 2 years almost. And what is Buddhist spiritual care? As you know, in the East, we are more focused on things like rites and rituals and how do we practice Buddhism, whether it's Mahayana, Theravada, Vajrayana, really doesn't matter. We are very focused on the what's called the effects, or rather the so-called items that are not really very meaningful. Sometimes we focus on the images, sometimes we focus on temples, we focus on the text, we focus on the rites, we focus on the rituals that we practice here in the East. But in the West, they do not have such a culture. So we are going to discuss this and how would we be practicing Buddhism there in the West. And as you know, in the East, we are more rites and rituals, as I mentioned, but in the West, it's more based on wisdom, on promoting, inculcating wisdom, understanding wisdom, and also to get a better perspective to the religion itself. So this evening, we're going to discuss this from a Western perspective from these two speakers. Let me bring them onto the screen so that we have a face to the name. We have here is Dr. Sunil Kariyakarawanaand from the UK, and we have Professor B. Scherer from Holland. Good afternoon to you, both you gentlemen, and welcome to the Buddhist Mahavyara's Facebook page and our
Yeah.
Dhammadana series. Can you hear me?
Yes, good
Yes.
afternoon, Leslie. Thank
Yes.
you. And good afternoon, Professor B.
Yes, good afternoon, Dr. Sunil, and everybody. So nice. Thank you for inviting us.
Okay. Before we start, let me quickly read the profiles of both these gentlemen. I'll start with Professor Dr. B first. Yeah. Now, Dr. B. Scherer is a full professor of Buddhist studies and the rector of the Buddhist Seminary at Free University, VU, in Amsterdam, Netherlands, and a long-standing practitioner and teacher of the Tibetan Buddhism. After studies in Germany and the US, Dr. Scherer received a PhD from Groningen University in 2002, and until recently, Dr. B had held the distinguished chair of religious studies and gender studies at Canterbury Christchurch University in the UK. So that was the profile for Dr. B, and now the profile for Dr. Sunil. Dr. Sunil was born in Sri Lanka. He entered the University of Kelaniya in Colombo and obtained his BA Honours degree, first class, in Linguistics, Literature and Philosophy. In 1985, he won the Commonwealth Postgraduate Scholarship offered by the Commonwealth Association of Canada and completed his Masters in Theoretical Linguistics at the University of Ottawa. In 1987, he was offered a teaching assistantship by the Cornell University of New York and obtained his PhD in Theoretical Linguistics and Cognitive Studies in 1992. In the same year, he was offered a senior lecturer position at the University of Kelaniya and worked there until April 2000. Then in April 2000, he won 2 international postdoctoral fellowships, one to take up research in child language acquisition at the Rikyo University in Tokyo, and the other at the Association of Commonwealth Universities UK to take up research in clinical linguistics at the University College in London. Now, having completed both research projects in 2002, he joined the Department of Language and Communication Science at the University of London, a City University of London, teaching clinical linguistics to BSc students. And in the same year, he migrated to the UK under the highly skilled migrant program. Dr. Sunil currently is the Buddhist advisor at St. Michael's College, Cardiff University. He's also the director of Kalyana Mitra and Buddhist of the Buddhist Chaplaincy Support Group. He's the first Buddhist chaplain to Her Majesty's British Armed Forces for the past 12 years, and an executive governing council member representing UK to the International Buddhist Confederation (IBC) in India. And currently, he is also the lecturer in Buddhist spiritual care at the Free University, VU, in Holland. So that is a profile of both our distinguished speakers this evening. And without much ado, I'd like to hand the studio to Dr. Sunil and Professor B to start this evening's the Dhamma discussion on how we practice Buddhist spiritual care in the West and what form should it take. Gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Really appreciate you inviting us today. And it is I had the honor of actually joining you quite a few times in this program, but today we are so delighted to have Professor B on board. And only difference between Professor B and myself, you already noticed his profile was read only less than 1 minute, whereas mine took about nearly 5 minutes or so. So my sincere apologies for that. So today we are going to actually talk about a very interesting, as Leslie pointed out. We mostly talk about Buddhist theory, but we are today talking about Buddhist practice as well, how the theory is going to translate into our practice. And I think, Buddhist spiritual caregiving, Buddhism has had a very long history of caregiving. The Buddha himself was actually keen on spiritual caregiving, and he said, I only teach two things. One is I teach about suffering, how to end it. And in fact, all spiritual caregiving is summed up already into those two sentences, understanding suffering and how to actually work with it. But of course, 2,600-year history of Buddhist spiritual caregiving in the East may not necessarily be translated into the West in the same way. And one might actually see, or ask the questions like, would the same type of rites and rituals that we perform in the East, would they be applicable to the West? Or what form should it take? So I mean, today we are going to contemplate on this. All the ideas are our own personal ones, but of course, we can all contemplate and discuss based on the Buddhist theory and practice. So, and the viewers, we also invite you to give your inputs and what do you think of our thoughts and ideas. So this is a negotiation. This is not a finite thing. And as Professor B would agree that we need to actually consult, everybody about this. Perhaps maybe, if I may invite Professor B to sort of say something about, or start the conversation about the topic. Over to you, Professor B.
Thank you, Dr. Sunil. Yes. I really enjoyed hearing, by the way, the 5 minutes of your CV. That's marvelous, wonderful. So no problem. It's so nice to have the opportunity to speak there. Now, what often academics do when they speak about topics is that they complicate matters. And that is good and bad. If it's so complicated that nobody can relate anymore, of course. But here, I just want to complicate one thing a little bit. And that is this whole notion about West and East. Of course, we have Buddhism in Asia, we have Buddhism outside of Asia, But at the moment, we have mainly hybrid forms where we have Asian communities outside Asia, we have non-Asian communities within Asia, or like you in Malaysia now, we have a mainly Sri Lanka-focused Theravada tradition in a majority Muslim country. So it's much more complicated. So we have various forms of global Buddhisms, and we have different groups within these forms that need different sort of care. But there are maybe some tendencies that you see, that we see from my time in UK and from Dr. Sunil's time in the UK and now from the Netherlands, that there are among non-Asian Buddhists, there are some sort of different needs and different approaches. We can call them modernist if we want. We can also question, is that an approach that we can recognize as traditionally Buddhist or not? But we know that people have needs, and then ultimately Buddhism is about people's needs. It's about the human condition of dissatisfactoriness, and whether you are deeply ingrained in Asian culture or not, the dissatisfactoriness or the suffering is the same. So a dying patient in a Dutch hospice might have a different context and might have different experience and might be used to be talked to in a different way than a dying patient in a Sri Lankan or in a Malaysian hospice. But still the suffering is really there and really real. And we still have to, as Buddhists, and want to, as Buddhists, respond. Now, one thing that is quite obvious is many non-Asian Buddhists don't respond very well to authority. They really like their own thinking. They don't like to be talked to in an authoritative voice. They want to be talked to in an understanding voice and in a voice that takes their point of view serious. And that is something that is actually not negative. So just because I'm wearing cleric's clothes doesn't give me any more rights in a Dutch hospital, right? It actually make people look a little bit funny. What is this person wearing for funny clothes, you know? So, and also outside Asia, Buddhism is organized very differently, often in terms of economics. So we can say it's post-merit economy. That doesn't mean that non-Asian Buddhists are not generous, but this emphasis of lay people to accumulate marriage, the punya sambhara, through generosity, through dana, is actually almost absent outside the Asian communities in the West. So we need to find different ways, different approaches here. It's not so that I, as a cleric, can go around and survive because I know my students will give me dana. Yeah, I have to have a job, you know, and people expect and respect that also. So that there are some different parameters. But I would put to you that generally the parameters are the same. There is suffering, there is the dukkha dukkata, the real experience of suffering. There is the need for kalyana mitta. There is a need for soothing of transitions. They might not be as ritual as in traditional Asian context, but there is the need for something haptic, something active, participatory, something ritual is also there. And then obviously in different Buddhist communities, these needs differ greatly, and we have to be flexible. So I would say my students, you know, when you're a Buddhist spiritual caregiver, you're not a Theravada Buddhist. You're not a Mahayana Buddhist. You're not a Vajrayana Buddhist, because you don't know what type of Buddhists you will encounter. You have to be everything to everybody. That is what you are. You're an empty Buddhist vessel of presence and loving kindness. Yeah. Over to you, Dr. Sunil.
No, actually, that's really wonderful. You touch on a gamut of topics there, keywords, actually, because I think, when you look into the history of Buddhism in the West, I mean, Buddhism started as mostly people identified it as a philosophy, like they stop me, I'm when I'm working as a chaplain to Her Majesty's forces, they keep asking me, is it a philosophy? Is it a religion? Is it, is it both or what? And I think, we have this idea that, how Buddhism kind of evolved over through time. Few people got started in Buddhist scriptures and they translated into English and blah blah blah. But another, how the Buddhist practices get translated into the West is also a very interesting topic. And you touch upon a number of keywords like hybrid, which is kind of not found in the Eastern context. But, in the now, say for example, I was born and brought up in the Sri Lankan Theravada tradition, and very little Mahayana, understanding of the Mahayana or Vajrayana practices there. And so you are, countries have its own, to use a word, very monolithic, one way, one type of Buddhism. Whereas in the UK alone, would you believe that there are 820 some Buddhist centers registered in the local government here, and all traditions of Buddhism. In London, 309 some languages spoken, and the variety of Buddhists, like the 18 Buddhist missions are here. All the Buddhist communities. When you see the variety, it is kind of really mind-boggling. and as a caregiver, this main question actually comes to us. What is the form it should take? Like last 16 years, nearly about 20 years with my prison chaplaincy experience as well. I have no, as you said, you don't know who you are walking to, and when you go to a prison or hospital or a university or armed forces, it could be anyone who just read a book, met a monk, visited the monastery, who just actually became a Buddhist. So keeping or leaving this Asian Buddhist component aside for a moment, now non-Asian, like say Caucasian, or the Western Buddhist. And now there's also Western. There was a Western Buddhist order, so to speak, set up by one British military colonel, and later on, which has now become Triratna. Earlier it was known as FWBO, Friends of Western Buddhist Order, and I think same thing applies to other countries as well. They would like to see their own take on the Buddhist theory and practice. And you are absolutely right, and that non-authoritative approach, and I have noticed that quite strongly in my experience as well. And sometimes I ask them, what is your Buddhist lineage, and they say absolutely none. So that really surprised me. How could you be a but actually Buddhism has that character. The Buddha says, as long as you take the refuge of the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, and you are a Buddhist, you don't necessarily have to be attached to a particular lineage or type of Buddhist, so to speak. So now, this really complicate the job of the spiritual caregiver? and our expectations and how we deliver our services to them. So perhaps, as somebody who has vast understanding of these the Western Buddhism and the care aspect as well, and as a chair of an academic institution, perhaps maybe if you could tell us a little bit more about, like, how would a caregiver prepare oneself to this challenge? I mean, it is an opportunity. I mean, don't take me wrong. I mean, every challenge is an opportunity as well. So over to you, Professor B.
Yeah, thank you. That's absolutely right. I think if I just can add to what you completely rightly say about how Buddhism is always evolving and accommodating the cultures it meets. So in the sense, hybrid it has always been hybrid in the way of Homi Bhabha's post-colonial and subaltern theory. So we see that even the traditions of Buddhism that claim that they are really original Buddhism, including some very conservative Theravada Buddhism, that they have evolved quite dramatically from the early Buddhist times, and have developed also away from the early Buddhist teachings quite dramatically. So and that there have been hybridizations, until the 13th century, there was huge Mahayana presence in Sri Lanka, and it has a huge impact up to today on certain rituals and forms of Buddhism within the Theravada context. So this hybridization has always been there. And I think it is okay, because the Dhammo is ihipasiko. And that means that people, when they come and look at the teaching of Lord Buddha, then they come from different cultural contexts, and they bring this perspective with them, and they need to make it work for themselves. Here in the West, what our focus is, we know that those in need of spiritual care, they feel less soothed by simply, for instance, listening to the chanting of a Parita Sutta. It's just not in the culture. What they want is to have something they can do themselves, for instance, some sort of mindfulness or loving kindness meditation, metta bhavana or sati, or they want to basically have a listening ear. So when you look at what we teach together in our seminary to our students, then yes, we expect a good knowledge of the Buddhist traditions before we accept them into our course. So normally on the level of a BA. But then we do something else. We ask them to have actually on master level an education in general spiritual care. And that means skills in listening, skills in care psychology, in how to talk to people. How do I talk to somebody who's dying? How do I talk to somebody who has cancer? How do I talk to somebody who has post-traumatic stress disorder from being an active service in the army, right? These things we need to teach and we need to understand. And that is not very Buddhist specific. So all our chaplains here in the Netherlands, they are required from our government to do these master courses, whether you're a Buddhist chaplain or a Muslim chaplain or a Christian chaplain, or a humanist chaplain. So, and after these master courses, then what we do is we take our Buddhist students and we run them together with them through a curriculum of very practical deepening, both in the Dhamma and in the applied Buddhism. So applied Buddhist palliative care, for instance, applied Buddhist conversation techniques. For instance, I can obviously go, and there's a very, very knowledgeable and convinced Buddhist there, and I can do mindfulness meditation with them, and it's no problem, or metta bhavana, or in the Tibetan tradition, even advanced things that we do. But many of these Buddhists that we see, they are very individualistic, and they might just, as you said, might have just read a book, right? And find some sort of affinity, a relationship of affinity with Buddhism. So then you need to be able to talk about dukkha and talk about the Dhamma in a way that appears a little bit more secular, without it being secular. You just don't do so much emphasis on devotional things, and you formulate things a little bit more in a upaya kaushalya, in an appropriate means way that people can step up on the teachings and take from them in the difficult situations there are. And very often our job is to be there and witness suffering, be present in the suffering. And then when there's an opening, to point to very foundational, very basic and transformational Buddhist teachings, such as the precious opportunity in this moment right now to change something for the future, and these kind of things, but also acceptance, all these kind of things. So, but I also see there is a question appearing in the chat that has to do, with, I'm not sure we really want to talk about Mahayana and Theravada, old fault lines, some Mahayana Buddhists saying, Theravada, they only have the lowest level of the teachings of the Buddha, and some people in Theravada saying, Mahayana, that is not really taught by the historical Buddha. Actually, let me tell you something. From a scholar perspective, most of the things in the Pali Canon were not taught by the historical Buddha. And that is not a problem. That is not a problem even in the Pali Canon, because there are criteria about what is authentic Dhamma. The Buddha himself in the Pali Canon actually talks about what is authentic. And he says authentic is what is in the spirit of what is being taught, what is not contradicting what is being taught, what is not leading towards samsara and suffering, but it was leading out of samsara and suffering towards the falling away of the kleshas, of the defilements, of the kilesas in Pali, the defilements. And if we put it in this spirit, we see that genuine, authentic Buddhist realization is manifesting in later centuries also in texts that are then called Mahayana Sutras, that are authentically showing in different geographical and temporal contexts pathways towards liberation and enlightenment. So I never feel the need to play this Theravada against Mahayana or Vajrayana, because, it over centuries has shown that all these methods work. They work. They bring realization and enlightenment. So why would we have this dualistic point of view and saying one is right and the other is no? Well, one is right and the other is also right.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think that is really very interesting, because I think this religion can be of two different types. One is revealed religion or realized religion. In a realized religion, actually, you are not taking things in a static way. When you said the Pali Canon, the remark about the Pali Canon is not, maybe what he's actually stated in there is exactly what the Buddha said. I mean, maybe the scriptures, but even if that is so, like, whether it is Chinese scriptures, the Tibetan, or Sanskrit or Pali, but then I think the what is really interesting in the Buddhism is there is there is place for people to actually reflect, contemplate, and then come to agreement. And this is exactly what the Buddha said in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. He said, even somebody comes and tells you that, oh, I heard this from the words of the Buddha, from his own mouth he uttered this, don't take it, just question it, and see if it actually fits into the dhammata, this realization, your experience. So therefore, what really matters is your experience and how you relate to it, rather than taking something as scriptures. So this doesn't mean to say that scriptures are not important or anything, but there is this three words in the Theravada tradition we talk about. We say pariyatti, patipatti, and pativeda. The pariyatti is the scriptures, the patipatti is how you translate that into practice, and then pativeda, what do you realize from it, and how does that realization help you reduce suffering? Ultimately that's what's important for us. So I mean, this got into a sort of a philosophical discussion, but I think you mentioned something really important, that we are together developing this master's course in Free University of Amsterdam, where we are trying to actually ask these questions and learn together. I mean, I think this is the most important part of the Buddhist teaching, the collective learning. The Buddha never said, oh, you got to take it the way I tell you, but I think the collective learning, this is a negotiation between the caregiver and the care receiver, and that is really what interests about the Buddhist spiritual caregiving. And as you know, the mindfulness movement is an interesting development in the Western world, even more than in the East. There's this huge interest in mindfulness movement. I mean, it is like I think I was told that it's about a multi-million dollar, I think billion-dollar industry in the US, the mindfulness is. And in London there was this mindfulness show in a big arena. There are about so many, 300, 400 different organizations presenting. So, but that is actually quite different from how it is understood in the Eastern context. It is built in. Mindfulness is not something to do, but it is to be. So I like your first name, be and being. So Buddhism is about that living out, isn't it? So, and I think those aspects need to come out in these academic courses and discuss widely, and Buddhism actually enables us to freely discuss this. It's not authoritatively ontologically given out in a tray. Oh, you take this as as you are told. But there is room for negotiation, discussion, and how it is really going to help. Now, you were mentioning about this chanting. When I should tell you an experience I had when I organized my very first Buddhist conference in the UK for the Armed Forces Buddhists. And then, one colonel came to me and said, what kind of a Buddhist are you? And I said, I don't know. And that takes us into what you said about empty Buddhist. I said, I don't know. And he said, but I said I was born and brought up in the Theravada tradition. I'm more familiar with it. But that didn't mean to, shut him off. And he said, what do you do? And I said, we do chanting, we do meditation, we do this and we do that. And he said, we don't do meditation. And he said, I'm a Nichiren Buddhist. We do just chanting. And I said, let's sit down and chant. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. We went on chanting for about 20-30 minutes. And then suddenly a Pali word came into my mind. That was Sajja. Sajjayana. Sajjayana means, Sa is collective, Ja is meditation. Chanting is a form of meditation. So the person, the culture that chanting came from did not realize that it was another form of meditation. So, and don't you think that there is that kind of awakening into some ritual practices, when we discuss and when we embrace each other's tradition, when we, respect each other's tradition, we could actually see some really amazing synergy, coming together as well. Over to you, Professor D.
No, you're absolutely right. I think to have an open heart and to embrace all the different wonderful forms of Buddhism. Buddhism is a forest of beautiful flowers, each unique, and still they're all recognizable flowers. And so to embrace that is what we need to do. It doesn't mean that we need to give up our own identity. I'm a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, and if I have a Tibetan Buddhist in front of me, I can provide a different level, deeper level of care. I can do POA with palliative care, in a palliative care setting, but I would never do that in a Theravada if I have a Theravada Buddhist in front of me and so on. But, I think it's important we let go this kind of dualistic thinkings about about the superiority of our own traditions. We have to accept that all forms of Buddhisms that are being practiced now have a long genealogy of change, And you said something about the mindfulness, and I completely agree, Dr. Sunil. I mean, this is a really huge thing outside Asia, but also in Asia. How many people go to Goenka's mindfulness retreats and so on in Asia and so on? And what we need to realize is that the current mass lay mindfulness movements, both in Asia and outside Asia, are a very recent thing that are based on breach with tradition. Mahasi, the Burmese mass then and mindfulness movements completely broke with fundamental Theravada principles of sati meditation by focusing on present-centeredness and non-judgmental, something that Kabat-Zinn then takes. So it's more the Burmese tradition that Kabat-Zinn looks at than the Zen tradition, although the Zen tradition also comes in there. And it amalgamizes and it hybridizes. So I think, and that doesn't mean that it's wrong or bad. I think what people helps, that is what we can embrace. We have also this curious form sometimes that you stand in a hospital bed here in Asia or outside Asia, and somebody is kind of Buddhist, but they are also kind of Christian, right? And they have dual or multiple belongings. And they interpret what is happening to them maybe in a Buddhist framework in terms of suffering and karma and cause and effect, but they also interpret it in a different religious framework at the same time. Our position is not to challenge these internal interpretations. Our position is simply to be there and be where we can a guide for people to use mindfully and effectively their experience of the dukkha dukkhata for transformation, yeah, and to sit with the suffering and give them a form to develop, yeah. It is so. I never challenge people who have multiple religious belongings there. Sometimes I even say, really, if you at the moment feel much more safer when thinking about the Jesus than about the Buddha, then why not? Yeah, it's okay. You can still use the gems, the transformative teachings that is there in the Dharma, in the Buddha Vajana, and somehow negotiate your own complicated, messy, and muddy subjectivity and belonging, religious subjectivity and belonging. So, but again, bound back to ritual, Dr. Sunil, yes, even the most secular people, when it comes to dying in the hospice, they need some ritual. And even if it is just taking the hand and humming some chant or something like that, I think we call it a ritual, but it's such a human need of connecting and marking the meaningfulness of the transitory moments, like dying.
No, that is absolutely right, Professor B. And thank you so much for those thoughts. And actually, we are discussing these similarities, differences does not necessarily mean that we should underestimate the power of rites and rituals. I've seen the same thing. In our head we always question about things, but there is also heart connection, and what. So it reminded me of what I read in one of the spiritual caregiving book, which said a Buddhist spiritual caregiver has to have 3 important qualities. Now I think the author said clarity of mind, goodness of heart, and a listening ear. And I think that it really does sum up this aspect of we intend well, and we actually we have good compassionate heart, and also also ready to listen and negotiate as to what one really needs, rather than trying to, I would like to convert you into my tradition, if I can. This is our urge and expectation. But and I think the amazing way the Buddha really puts, I think making the Dhamma as the teacher. In his deathbed, the Buddha said, who is going to lead this Sangha after you? And the Buddha said, no one. And I think that really brings the point home. He said the Dhamma has the teachings, has always led me, and we would like to remain so. And I think that really does sum up. So anyway, we have been, this conversation we can go on for hours and hours, and I think we will continue this conversation. But at this point, and I think it'd be lovely to give our audience an opportunity to ask questions. And what do you think of any of the points that we raise here in our conversation? And would you like to explore this topic with us collectively, and so on. Do you think that that would be a good idea? What is your what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So, and also I would welcome many different voices. We are not here to entertain or answer a question of one person. So please ask questions about spiritual care.
Okay, here comes a question. Isn't early Buddhism text the only commonality that binds all traditions?
Yeah, we already answered a little bit. Actually, what is practiced in Theravada is not early Buddhism. It's far away from early Buddhism. But early Buddhism is also not just the Pali Suttas. The Pali Suttas were written down in the 1st century before Common Era, 500 years after the Buddha. We have the translations of 5 to 8 different early Buddhist schools in Chinese. So if you, like me, have studied classical Chinese, I welcome you to read them and see how many differences are there with the Theravada tradition. So it's the whole question: what is early Buddhism? What are the sources, and so on. So and also you will see when you study the early Buddhist philosophy in Pali, in Sanskrit, in Chinese, and then compare with what some people say is later Mahayana philosophy. Compare, for instance, with the philosophy of Nagarjuna. You will see actually there is in principle no difference. Yeah. And Mahayana talks about shunyata as a more abstract philosophical term, but the term sunya is there in the Pali text. The term kong is there in the translation of the early Buddhist texts in Chinese, and so on. And you could actually say that later Abhidharma philosophy in Theravada is a huge deviation from early Buddhism. Huge deviation. Yeah. Sudhimagga is not early Buddhism.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there is also, I mean, thank you for those thoughts. But one time, His Holiness Dalai Lama was actually interviewed. I mean, not just one time. He repeatedly said, I mean, I think we also have to take this into consideration. He said, Pali Buddhism is the foundation, he said, and the house has been built on those foundations. And he gave a really good example, which I think is a lovely example. Is that, you mentioned Nagarjuna. The Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamika Karika was a commentary to one of the sutras. One of the sutras in the Pali canon, Kachanagota Sutta. So,
it was not a commentary on the Theravada Pali, but it was on the Savastivadi version, Sanskrit version of this. So, it is much more complicated than that. It is much more complicated than that.
No. But the content-wise, and I think it was the Paticca Samuppada. I mean, one thing that we all agree. I don't want our listeners to get the wrong opinion. The Paticca Samuppada is, in the Pali Buddhism, it says one who really sees Dhamma sees Paticca Samuppada. Yeah. One who sees Paticca sees me. So, and Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamika Karika is about Paticca. And actually, David Kalupana, one of the Buddhist scholars, who write a really good translation of the Mula Madhyamika Karika. He said this is a really good example of a commentary of the Mahakachanagota Sutta. So anyway, and I think we should not dispute the similarities across these traditions, and I think this is what Dalai Lama is trying to point out. Absolutely. And I think the respect, and this is where the real respect builds up. And I think collectively, the old traditions actually make that core of Buddhism, in my view. So
Yes,
anyhow,
I think what is important to understand is that in the core of our Buddhist teachings, we are siblings always and together. It is always only individuals who, for reason of power and superiority and internal psychology, try to say, well, but my tradition is better than yours, right? So I think we need to really let go of that. Yeah, because if you're really interested in early Buddhism and you want to practice Buddhism in the early times, it's impossible because the context is different, the time and the geographical context. And Buddhism is for the people. It is for people who suffer, and they suffer in different ways. Now we suffer in a different way than we suffered for 2,500 years ago. So
yeah. No, absolutely. I think point well taken, and I think it is not either or. It is
exactly,
both.
it's both.
Respect, understanding, and I think in that way, and we need to, we need to understand the common, and I think this is where really, Western Buddhism can make a huge contribution, and being able to appreciate, admire, and embrace different aspects of Buddhism, without, you can let go of your identity without letting go of the, or actually, embracing the humanity, so to speak. Anyway, and I think we maybe there may be some other questions. Is a Buddhist caregiver, Buddhist chaplain, monastic, or does it cover a wider audience? What do you think, Professor B?
Well, different Buddhist traditions have different ideas about what is a monastic. Yeah. So, and again, the current Theravada tradition has a very different idea. There was never an idea in early Buddhism that there should be a monastery for all year round. Only for the varshas there should be people coming together. For instance, but you have Buddhist traditions where people have different types of vows and are different types of clerics. As a tantric cleric, in my own tradition, I'm regarded higher than the monastics, right? So I could have all kind of interesting Buddhist titles in front of my professor if I wanted to. But, then you have Japanese Buddhism who have priest system, clericals who can be celibate or can be married and so on, who call themselves more priests and so on. You have the married monastics, the partially celibate monastics in the Naiva Buddhist tradition, and the only surviving Indic form of Buddhism outside of Sri Lanka, who use Sanskrit in their Buddhism, in Nepal, and so on. So in the West, how we have done it, or we have done it in the Netherlands, as the Buddhist spiritual caregiver, you can be monastic or semi-monastic, you can be clerical, you can be not clerical. It doesn't matter. It's a function. You have to go through the education, and then you actually are getting permission, authorization. We call that sending. And the authorization is being given in the name of the Dutch Buddhist Union, which is representing more than 80% of all Buddhists in the Netherlands, both Westerner and traditional Buddhists. And they give you authorization on the recommendation of the rector of the seminary, which is me. So we are educating people, no matter whether they define as lay people or as clerics or monastics. And then when we think they are ready, we give a recommendation, and the Dutch Buddhist Union then delegated to the Dutch sending agency then gives authorization. And in this way, you are an endorsed Buddhist chaplain officially. And in the Netherlands, it's like that you can get actually a paid job with that. You become a civil service in the Dutch civil service, working in a prison or working in the army and so on.
I think that's a great point. I mean, that's really, I mean, even at the time of the Buddha, the Sangha was not just limited to monastics, and it was bhikkhu, bhikkhuni, upasaka, upasika, fourfold community. And this is very clear in the, Mahaparinibbana Sutta, where the Buddha says, this I think you are absolutely right. Later on they define it in terms of monasticism, because it's a sort of a developing a superiority concept, which I think needs to be looked at and discussed carefully. So and I think I totally, I don't necessarily agree with every point, but I think this is this is absolutely right. Spiritual caregiving, I mean, it is sometimes, now in the pandemic, only person in the hospital to give care is, now what I have done is I have actually asked a nurse or a doctor to do that job for me. I provide the chanting or whatever, and they do that job. So, because we are not allowed in COVID wards and so on. And I think that is very much in the Buddhist spirit to do that, rather than keeping this, priestly, clerical status of a person. So I take your point on that, and thank you for bringing that up. Any more questions, Leslie? Suffering is not different, only understanding is the different.
Yeah, that's a very simplistic and reductionist misunderstanding of what I've said. I'm talking about the dukkha dukkata, the concrete experiences of dissatisfactoriness, which are always concretely contextualized according to where you are, in which culture, in which time, what the concrete contexts are.
Yeah.
The general human condition, the other two of the three forms of dukkha, they are philosophical they are philosophical, and they are not changing at all, But our concrete experience of what it means impermanence, what means the existential lack of inherent ontological security, these kind of things, the concrete experiences, they change. They're very different for different times and different cultures.
Is it also the case that Buddhism is not trying to get rid of suffering, and there is a misunderstanding because people think, oh, Buddha was asking us to get rid. I think there were a lot of spiritual paths where they were trying to get rid of it. So there's a bit of an aversion, negative thought developed into that. But I think Buddhism, on the contrary, is trying to understand. The Buddha said in his first teachings, he said, I want you to understand suffering, rather than standing under, to use Venerable Ajahn Sumedho's term. So thank you for that question. And I think that's I don't know if we have more time for other questions, or whether we ask Leslie to step in. Sirs, why wouldn't palliative care be applicable to a Theravada disciple? What do you think?
Of course it is. That's again not listening to what I'm saying. I gave an example about the Tibetan palliative care technique that I wouldn't do with a Theravada Buddhist. Of course,
Yeah,
because it's a culturally different form.
yeah.
That's
No, no,
it.
that is absolutely right. I mean, there has been a lot of examples of palliative care in the Theravada tradition, and there are actually cultural. I mean, to tell you the fact that there was a very interesting talk at the Buddhist Society here, Professor B. There was one Tibetan, actually Rinpoche, who came and sat to give a talk, and he just actually looked around the hall and he said, he was asked to talk about Tibetan Buddhism, and he just looked around and he said, there is no such thing called Tibetan Buddhism. There is a Tibetan culture and Buddhism. So it was so funny, and I think sometimes we hang on to, as you correctly pointed out, hang on to these ideas, and we mix the culture with the religion, which I think is wrong. And we got to understand there are cultural differences. We are cultural animals, whether we like it or not, and we do have to understand. And the Buddha did the same. Wherever Buddhism went, for example, China, Japan, Korea, wherever, it actually assimilated its own cultural practices, and Buddhism is always peacemaking and wanted to make peace with the existing cultures and so on. So isn't
The
it?
thing is, when we are Buddhist carers, Sunil, when we are Buddhist carers, we have to be, in first instance, also practitioners of Buddhism. And that means we need to empty our ego.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to empty it so much that if I have a dying Theravada Buddhist in front of me, of course, I know they will not accept me as a monastic or as a cleric. I will call my friends from the Theravada monastery and ask them to chant the Parita Sutras and so on. If that's what is needed. It's not about my need. It's about the need of the person in front of me. And that's what we need to do.
Absolutely, and then I think you're absolutely right. But at the same time, in the absence of a Theravada monk or priest or whatever, and sometimes if there are some, actually, because in my experience, when I go to a hospital or some place, sometimes they say, they never ask what kind of a Buddhist are you, and sometimes they request me to, I just hold the hands and I say, can I do a little prayer for you, chanting for you? And they are delighted to receive that. So and then I take that as a huge privilege. And I think we should also acknowledge that aspect. Some the Buddhists, around here, they are very open-minded, as you said, belonging to dual identities and so on. And sometimes they do understand, you are coming from a practice, so therefore they want you to do the chanting for them. And in that sort of a situation, we don't necessarily have to refuse that. And we, yeah.
You're absolutely right. Thank you for clarifying that. I think we're almost out of time, right?
Yeah. And finally, can I thank Leslie and the Buddhist Mahavihara for organizing this wonderful talk opportunity for us. And if anybody wants to get any information about our course, Buddhist Spiritual Caregiving, offered by the Free University of Amsterdam, with Professor B and myself, please, don't hesitate to contact us. And I think Leslie will very kindly send you the flyer that we put together. Is that okay, Leslie?
Yes, thank you, Doctor. I think that was a very interesting talk that we had this evening. I think basically what we're trying to say is we do not have to live in silos, and we do not have to have these brands or labels that we attach to each other. As far as Buddhism is concerned, we're all basically humanists. We are, humanity is first, and it's just like the Buddhist teaching is like studying medicine, but you have different doctors prescribing different medicines for different types of diseases, and each one has got his own little cure, depending on the need of the patient, right? So I think at the end of the day, let's forget about labels and where we or what we represent. I think at the end of the day, it's
I think you beaten both of us. You should have given this talk yourself.
no. But
Sadhu,
but
sadhu, sadhu.
but I like to just pick up on a point that Professor B spoke about just now about in Amsterdam, or sorry, in Holland rather, where the government actually promotes this idea of chaplains being trained, specifically trained to look at palliative care, or even handling cancer patients, and those with post depression for the armed forces, or somebody who's having a bad time, or just financial difficulties, or whatever it is. But I think it's a great thing that I think many countries don't even, or even religions or universities for the matter, don't even think about. Could you just quickly, just briefly explain to that, and maybe I will jump into that brochure, and maybe both of you could explain a little bit about the course itself.
Over to you, Professor B.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the Dutch government gives us a lot of very concrete rules. So you need to have an MA in spiritual care. And then as a Buddhist, you need to be firmly grounded in a Buddhist practice, in a Buddhist community, and you have to have studied Buddhism on a BA level sufficiently. And then we can admit you to our course to get certified as a Buddhist spiritual caregiver. And what we do is we teach how to be a Buddhist spiritual caregiver in the concrete Dutch and Western system. We give specific Buddhist interpretations of the secular tools of Buddhist spiritual caregiving. So what does it mean for us as Buddhists to be active listening? What does it mean for us to use Buddhist mindfulness, not secular mindfulness, but Buddhist mindfulness, metta bhavana, all these kind of things in a situation, in prison, in the army, in the hospice, and so on, to help others. And we send our students on work placements, and we supervise and intervise that, and we work very practically on their skills to be actually there as a spiritual caregiver in these transformational moments in somebody's life where they need the help. And when I started taking seat as as the rector of the Buddhist seminary, I came with a program of what you could call resourcing, going back to the sources a little bit more. For me, the program had gone a little bit too far to the secular side. So one of the reasons I attracted to Dr. Sunil is that I want more input by really deeply trained Buddhist spiritual caregivers who can bridge what is needed in a secular society with a deep experience of what works from the Buddhist side and from the Buddhist society. And this is what we're trying to do.
No, excellent. No, that's a really this. Thank you, Leslie, for displaying this. If any one of you would be interested to join the course, this is open. I mean, very kindly, Professor B has actually made it open to the public. Anyone interested in the course can send me an email. And we will have an application to fill in, and then you can join as well. And this is really a great opportunity. The topics that we discuss, we will be discussing in academic settings. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so
gentlemen.
much. And it is over to you, Leslie. And thank you
Thank you.
for enabling us and joining us your very wonderful program today.
Yeah, it's our pleasure, Dr. Sunil and Professor B. It's really our pleasure to have you here this evening to discuss this very interesting topic. I found this quite enlightening, actually, and looking at it from a different perspective. And I also hope that our listeners or anyone who's paying attention to this program will see, especially young adults, who never thought of taking Buddhist caregiving as a career. I think you can actually consider it as a career eventually. Maybe not in Malaysia or not in the East, but in Europe, I think that's where it's starting, and it's already started. And you can always contact Professor B or even Dr. Sunil and explore this even further. So without taking much more of your time, let me take this opportunity to thank both Dr. Sunil and Professor B for being with us on their Sunday afternoon there in England and in Holland, and to be with us. And on behalf of the Committee of Management and the monks of the Buddhist Mahavihara, thank you once again for being here this evening.
Can we end the program with a very short spiritual caregiving from Professor B?
Oh,
Because,
wonderful.
a transference of merit or dedicating merit. I'm trying to convert him to Theravada Buddhism.
Well, we do transfer of merit also in the Tibetan tradition. Yeah. Okay, so may every good impression that arose from this talk, and also every difficult impression, become transformative on our path towards liberation and enlightenment, and may it bring us to the active enactment and performance of loving kindness and compassion, sympathetic joy in equanimous and impartial form for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
So thank you both, Dr. Sunil and Professor B, and hope we can have you back with us sometime soon to discuss other topics in caregiving as well, especially caregiving. I find this subject actually quite intriguing and quite interesting, as opposed to just studying the theological aspects of Buddhism. So with that, we've come to the end of this evening's Dhamma sharing. So for all our listeners, have a pleasant evening and a Sukhi Hotu.